how do we usually do it? Well, this is how we usually do it. It's just the opposite. The church is planted. We have this idea of what we want the church to be, and we gather a team. We find somebody who can lead worship, and find someone who can need a good secretary. Of course, if you're the leader, you're probably going to be the one who's going to be doing the preaching on Sunday mornings. You got to find a place to meet. So you find a location, whether it be a theater or whether it be a storefront, or it may even start in somebody's home. But you're starting all this here, and the church is planted, and you let people know, here we are. Now come. We want to be a great church where you can come and grow. So you plant the church, and then you begin to develop events and programs, and you have an ideology that you live by, mission, vision, all that kind of stuff. You have a style, that you have because of to make you distinctive from other churches, and you do all these things to attract people to come and be discipled into the culture of that brand of church. Now, it's not necessarily being discipled into the image of Christ, but they're being won to this style of whatever church it is, whatever culture this church has. Now, some may remain lost in this setting, but they're religious, and they're able to follow the teachings of the church for a season. And that's why you have a lot of people in the traditional churches who are there, but they may not even know Jesus. And if they do, they're still infants. They're still just born. They've never been discipled. And they learn how to follow the teachings of the church for a season. And after a while, year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, it grows stale, and they disappear. They go out the back door. Now, the good news is that some may become disciples of Jesus in this model. But usually, as I mentioned, they become disciples of the church. And those who are really active and really becoming disciples of the Lord, really faithful to the teachings of the church, really doing what they're told to do when they go to the new members class, they learn all the policy, they learn all the procedures, they learn how to function in that system, and they're faithful in all those things that they're told to be faithful in. Well, these disciples of this church, well, they usually become leaders, or they become clergy. So then what do you have? You have a separation of those who are in the congregation and those who are in the clergy. And those who are the leaders or the clergy are considered much more spiritual than those who are part of the congregation. And many times they are. But that's very unfortunate. It shouldn't be a difference. There shouldn't be any division between clergy and the rest of the congregation. The giftings go throughout the whole body, not just within an elite group. We all are called to be disciples of Jesus and follow his ways. So the possible results in this situation, we have, there's no mission. There's very little mission. It's all ingrown. It's all for the sake of the growing up of that congregation. There are very few disciples are being made, and the Jesus they know is through the style of the church rather than revelation by relationship with Jesus. So it's not kingdom of God focus. It's kingdom of that church focus. So what do you have? You have churches in a community that are competitive. They talk down about other churches, maybe not to one another, maybe not in public, but they're competitive. They treat it as though one of you is Burger King and the other one's McDonald's, and whoever makes the best hamburger is the one who's going to get the most tithes on Sunday morning, or have the most people show up for the event. This is not kingdom of God. This is the world. This is the way the world thinks. And so we function as a business. We function as something that is entrepreneurial in a business sense, rather than as family that care for one another, ministering to one another, and learning from Jesus. Now, why are very few disciples are not being made in this? Well, they're not being made because in the traditional, institutional, attractional church, got a lot of words we can try to describe this. This system takes a great deal of time to run, so that there is no time, and there's very little time to make disciples. You've got a lot of work to do. You've got to put on the event on Sunday morning, whether it's a 45-minute service or a 3-hour service, depending on your tradition. You're going to be involved a lot of your time in making sure that service functions exactly the way you think it should function, and then putting it all together, and everybody's talents, everybody's energies all funding, all those things are being poured into that event to make it happen. And then there's very little time to make disciples. Discipleship is reduced to a classroom. You do discipling, it's usually done in a classroom setting rather than through relationships. And classroom discipleship has very little fruit. It has to be done through relationships, learning how to live life according to the principles of the kingdom of God as Jesus modeled when he walked the earth. That's what we should do. But unfortunately, we've reduced our discipleship time to a Wednesday night Bible study, which is just a mini church, a time of singing, and worship, and a teaching. Very little time for interaction. Now, many churches have small groups that will try to meet this problem, but still the focus of all the energy and most of the assets of that congregation are on the main meeting on Sunday morning. So there's very little time to make disciples. So usually what happens is only the professional leaders team is being discipled, and they're being discipled to run a church. They're being grown and matured so that then one day maybe they'll grow up and mature and go out and start a church just like the one they're a part of, which seldom happens, but it does happen. But are they really disciples of Jesus, or are they disciples of the church? So remember this. It all begins from your revelation of Jesus and the gospel of the kingdom. That's where it starts. If you don't have that, you can't go any further. It begins with your revelation of Jesus and your revelation of the gospel of the kingdom. And then knowing that making disciples is the Lord's command. We're compelled to go and share the gospel. Then let the church be formed around relationships, starting with Jesus, and never an ideology, never a doctrine, never the government style of the church, never a cause or a style or anything like that, or someone's agenda. It's around Jesus. And then Jesus must remain head of the church, and we must follow him. That's the core. That's the key. Jesus must remain the head of the church, and we follow him. That way we're not following a man, we're not following a system, we're not following a tradition, because those things can quickly go astray even within a generation. Many of the great leaders in our history of the church were doing tremendous works and following the Lord wholeheartedly. But once it got a generation away from them, it usually became perverted. It usually lost its steam. It usually even went astray. And sometimes it fell into error and heresy. So Jesus must remain the head of the church, and we follow him. Now let me ask you, do you really trust Jesus enough to lead the congregation, or do you have to take it up and do it instead? That's what I mean. Jesus has to be in the focus. That's why the first thing begins with a revelation of Jesus, where he's real. Jesus is not just a guest at our church services, standing in the corner watching what's going on. He should be leading the congregation. Let me ask you this question. Think about your church that you attend on a regular basis, if you do, or if you've ever been to a local church. What would happen if Jesus came in on Sunday morning, beginning of the service, and the service was about to start, and walked up onto the platform? And, everybody knew it was Jesus. What would they do? What would they do if they really knew it was Jesus? Well, what do you do? He is just as much there when we gather together in his name for his purpose, to do his mission. When we gather together, whether we see him there with our physical eyes or not, his word says that he is there in our midst. So it really shouldn't be any different. If we physically saw him walk up onto that platform on Sunday morning, or walk in the middle of our living room on Sunday morning, or walk into the coffee shop where we're gathering with other believers, or whatever style of the church it is, it should not function any differently than if we really saw him there, or whether we're just knowing that he's there by the power of his Spirit. Something to think about. Now, go do it.